Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. You know, I'm a huge fan of curiosity and creativity. My listeners know this. I mean, that's why I do this show, right? I just want to know stuff, and I want to speak to fellow travelers, others who are fascinated with being curious or who live life with a clearly curious approach. And that's just one of the reasons why I'm excited about my guest tonight. I've known him for almost 3 decades. That's hard to believe. And he's one of the most curious and funniest people that I know. He's a computer programmer turned motivational speaker. And that in and of itself is something that we're probably going to talk about. An improv-inspired business trainer, a TED talker, the author of Improvised Success and Say Yes, and now the co-host of the podcast, In a World of Improvised Movie Homages. Please welcome to the show, the curious and hysterical Avish Parashar. Avish, my friend, my brother, how are you?
Hello, Dan. I feel with an intro like that, I have a lot to live up to now. So
You're the improv guy. If I say that I just kind of off the cuff did that, it would be a bold-faced lie. I try to make sure like that my show is free-flowing and I have conversations that have very little form, which kind of fits really well with what you do. I have a couple of things that I always want to talk about, and my intros at least are sort of sketched out. So anybody out there who thinks I just rattle that shit off is just, here's the reveal. I don't. I kind of work on that a little bit. But, hey, man, you deserve it because obviously we've been friends for almost 30 years now, right? Well, we met in 91 or 90, I think it was.
92.
But so 29 years. And it's crazy. We met at Penn. We were both in the same fraternity, Kappa Alpha Society. Hello, Caps out there. We've just been close ever since, and, in my travels to Japan, I would come home occasionally and always touch base in Philly with my friends Avish and Mike and a bunch of folks out there who you know who you are. It's interesting because the way that life turns around and changes around and you go here and there, and some people are always there, always people you can count on, always people you can rely on. And you're one of those people in my life. And I thank you for that, Avish. And it's November. It's kind of a good time to be grateful for things. So, hey, I'm very grateful for you.
Well, thank you, Dan. And the feeling is likewise. And to that point, there's like people who you don't, touch base with every couple of months or whatnot. But then once you do, it's almost like, no time has passed. You just kind of jump right back into it. So every time we kind of reconnect, I sort of feel that way. Like, yeah, we may not have talked in like a year, but it's kind of like we're sitting there in the fraternity house just having a beer.
I know, right? I mean, we're not drinking beer, though, for the record. I mean, nobody can see us.
I thought about it, but I went with the water.
Well, we are old now, and it is a school night, sort of, so to speak, But I'll tell you, man, it is just good to see you. And I gave you the blow up in the intro, but as long as I've known you, improv's been your thing. One of your differentiators, or maybe your big differentiator. I mean, you went to college, you went to Penn, and you ended up leaving Penn, like graduating and going into computer science or becoming a computer programmer. So how does one go from there to motivational speaking and improv? I mean, this is fascinating to me because that's a heck of a journey.
It didn't happen all at once, number one. Number two is that like I said, improv has always been my thing. And so I did theater in high school. And when I came to college, it was to get an engineering degree. And I knew how much time theater took in high school. And I'm like, I can't devote that much time. I got to focus on studying and whatnot, which ended up being a big joke of a statement. So I didn't want to do theater, but then I saw the improv group and it just looked like fun. And I knew it took a lot less time than theater. And so I just tried out. The first show I saw a week later, they're having auditions, the campus group, and I got in. And that pretty much changed the entire course of my life in many ways, obviously professionally. But in that improv group were a couple people who were in the fraternity that Dan was already in. And they kind of got me to come by and rush and pledge. So yeah, it just got to a point where by the end of college, I loved improv, was good at it. And people were even putting that bug in my ear, like, oh, are you going to do any kind of performing? Or are you going to keep doing improv after college? And honestly, until people had said that, I never even really considered it. But then I thought about it. And so I got my degree in computer engineering and worked as a programmer. But even from before I graduated, my goal was to be a performer. So I started an improv group with the dreams of turning it into like the second city of Philadelphia. Obviously, that didn't quite happen.
Polywampus
Improv Comedy. But we had a good 7-year run and we did a lot of shows and I learned a lot. And because I had those big dreams, I spent a lot of time in bookstores buying and reading books on marketing, leadership, growth, motivation. So I kind of started learning about this side of the industry and it really appealed to me. So I started getting that inkling like, oh, well, someday it'd be great to like be a speaker because I was watching speakers and I really liked it. And then through the improv group, I started doing some like team building workshops and stuff, like corporate stuff. And so when it was time for me to finally say, you know what, like Polywampus is never going to be the thing I wanted it to be. It's time for me to sort of move on with my life. I didn't know what else to do at that point. And so I'm like, well, I wanted to be a speaker someday. So why not jump with both feet into that at that point? And so it's kind of a progression. I started learning about one while doing the other, and you know, computers for a long while was just the way to pay the bills, and it was work I enjoyed, but it was never like gonna long term fulfill me.
I can't imagine like a better way to blow off steam as a coder. I mean, you're sitting in front of a screen all day, and I'm, you know, look, you and I were both into creativity, right? I mean, I talk about creativity a lot. I'm a PR and marketing guy. You know, creativity, it's core kind of, I wouldn't call it a skill, but certainly a core value maybe, or a core competency. I don't know how you want to, what you would say, but of the work that I've been involved in. And people say that there are non-creative jobs. I don't believe that. I don't believe there are any jobs that are not creative, right? I believe fundamentally, even a coder, right? It's somebody who's working on some financial code, which I believe is the kind of stuff that you were doing, you know, there has to be an element of creativity that you're playing with all day long. And still, we'll get back to that in a second, but still, after staring at the screen, it must have been a relief to go, okay, I'm leaving, I'm heading to my troop.
Yeah, I mean, after leaving anything, just any job, good or bad, like yeah, just it's shifting. You know, the one of the things after I speak, you know, people will say, "Hey, should I take an improv class?" And you know, my answer is always yes, because even if it doesn't benefit you professionally, like it's just fun. And when you're doing improv right, I thought about this a lot, especially over this last year and a half. One of the reasons I'm so drawn to improv is it's one of the few activities that is almost always guaranteed to get me into the flow state because,
Oh, interesting.
you know, where just like things are just happening, everything's working, it's clicking. So I would imagine being able to do that on like or twice a week if you're like going to do an improv rehearsal or workshop and then do a show. Like regardless of what you're doing for work, it's like this is just a great way to engage and recharge and you know have a great time. And for me also, there it was always ended up doing with people I liked. So it's doing all that plus you're doing with friends. So like what's better than that?
Well, did you start to make those connections early on when you were working in your day job and or even in college? I don't know, but certainly when you were by the time you got into your professional career, where you're working your day job and then you go do improv, and you know you'd get into the flow state, as you said, where you're starting to make the connection that, geez, this is something that could work in the workplace.
Not exactly. It was actually almost the reverse. It was the reading the business side, trying to learn how to grow the group and be a better leader. I started seeing how those ideas could help me do better at improv. So one of the earliest ones was I read Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, and I'm reading it, and all of a sudden I'm getting all these ideas for how to perform improv better. Like if you read his Seven Habits, the first three are about independence, which is developing your own self. And the next three are interdependence, which is communication, working with others. And that changed my idea and approach to improv. So I was like, look, if I make myself good enough, then I can worry about other people. When you're doing improv and it's all unpredictable, you don't know what the other people are going to do or say, and sometimes they have different experience levels. It's easy to get nervous about, man, what are they going to say? Can I trust them? Or blame the other person if like a scene doesn't go well, like, you know, they dropped this offer, they messed this up. But that like flip from the Seven Habits was like, oh no, just focus on yourself. And once your own core skill set is strong enough, then you can worry about like, all right, how do I, you know, respond to them? And so like things like that. So it wasn't so much the improv helped me with business at first. It was more the business side. I saw how it applied to improv, and then I realized, oh, I can flip that now.
That's a little bit wild. I haven't heard it explained in that way before. Because I always think about, you've got a team, you're out there, you need to do some team building, and you know, you have any number of choices available as a manager, as a leader, or you know, later on in your career as either an owner or as a senior executive or whatever. Any number of choices of the types of team building or training exercises that you would pursue, right? And you know, by the time you're at a certain point in your career, I mean, you know, I've been doing marketing comms for whatever 25 years and been in a variety of organizations with varying degrees of attention on personal and team development. But I've been through the ringer of like, I mean, so many different types of exercises and facilitators and so on. And usually, like, I will admit that I haven't done any explicitly improv training in my career, but I know that there's a lot of training that draws its inspiration from improv and from yes, and for example, it's a huge area. I think that's ripe to be developed. I mean, my own professional development journey, like I said, is featured all different kinds of stuff. Mostly there's like assessments and you do this, you do some team building exercises and so on, but I wouldn't put that together as, or put it together as like business is informing the improv, not the other way around in like it is in your situation. But I don't know, man. I mean, when you started to develop as an improvisation, like develop as a do you say a professional improv comedian, or would you just say just really good at really good at improv? I don't know what's.
Yeah, if you're talking just performance side, yeah, as an improviser, improv comedian, I don't think we need to put the word professional in front of there because it's hard to make any money doing just improv.
I think it's fun as hell to watch, and certainly I remember in college you guys were fantastic. When you started to really dig into taking those business lessons, applying them to improv, right, and then thinking about how then you could turn that around and maybe apply it to businesses. What were the particular things like that you thought would be great in a business environment? And then what were the improv games, for example, that you thought were like ripe for use in business?
Sure. So I started with that kind of Covey model. And, another way of thinking about independence and interdependence, just switch the words to creativity and communication, right? Because to me, you talk about creativity, every job is, and to me, that's true because the heart of independence is accessing your own creativity. So once I realized that I have more than one option, I can figure out any problem, I can roll with whatever comes with me, that's how you build your core. And then interdependence, just how do you communicate? So that's kind of how I started structuring my workshops is, all right, we got to, no matter what I'm presenting on, we got to talk about how do you access your creativity. So there's a number of improv games that I'll play and I'll have participants play. If we're talking like a workshop format, which is what I did more of years ago. Now it's more keynote type stuff, but I still do some workshops. So it's, everyone I think is tremendously creative. It's just we've all got these filters. So I won't go into the whole spiel, but you think about your conscious and subconscious. Your subconscious mind is where your creative power is. The conscious mind is the part that everyone thinks with, right? That's your thinking awareness part. And then we have this filter that every time your subconscious pops up an idea, the conscious mind starts evaluating. Is that a good idea? Is that going to work? Should I say that? Are people going to make fun of me? Is it appropriate? And we've cut off the subconscious immediately. So I just do a bunch of exercises to get people to practice quieting that filter, bypassing it, and just letting ideas flow from their subconscious, and the creative stuff just happens automatically if you are able to. So anyone can do it. It's just some people, they're very self-conscious, it's very ingrained. So it takes a lot more effort and work. Others are like, on day one are blurting. I literally use the term blurting, like just blurt, like just open your mouth and see what comes out. And it's amazing the stuff that people do who thought they couldn't improvise when you just give them that one little direction.
So it's a freeing exercise, freeing the mind to kind of have that, I guess, openness, right? Encouraging openness, encouraging authenticity, I guess, freedom of thought in a lot of ways, right?
And it is authenticity because if you're blurting from your subconscious, like that idea was inside of you. So there's a certain amount of fear that, what you're going to have to justify what came out or where did that come from? Or other people are going to look at you like, oh my God, I can't believe he said that.
I mean, did you ever see anything in the times that you were doing training in the cases that you've worked with organizations? Did anything like really surprise you or shock you in these blurt exercises? Were there any real serious aha moments for you and for the participants?
I tell people if you're not surprising yourself, you're not quite there yet. So one of my standard exercises with this is a game called Expert Interview, where I would get the audience to tell me something to be an expert on. And it's something I don't actually know anything about. And then anyone in the audience can ask me any question and I just got to answer it. 100% confidence like I am the world's leading expert on it. And then after I demonstrate it and do it, I'll have people just in small groups, like 2 or 3 people play it. So I tell you, if you're not surprising yourself, then you're still staying in that evaluative conscious mind state. And so what you want to do is either something pops out of your mouth that you weren't expecting, or you start at one place and then you end up somewhere you're like, wow, I have no idea how this answer got me to this point. So to that question, yes, you should be always surprising yourself. In terms of if anything really bad happened where it got, did anything like shocking happen? Like, oh, no, because I think there's always that little bit of limitation, number one. And number two, I try to make it as safe a space as possible. So I do a lot of partner work because, it's very possible it has happened and just it was only 2 people knew about it and so I rarely have someone come in front of the room and in front of, 10, 50, 100 people in that risky situation. And I say you just open your mouth and say the first thing that happens. I've done this for 30 years. The next level is how do you quickly evaluate the idea before you say it? And then without knocking yourself out of your creative flow. So I'm able to divert without saying the offensive thing.
It would have been fun to find something offensive. I was really just trying to aim at like something here because I think that as somebody who helps people be creative, certainly, in the work I've done as a team leader, as a manager, I want to create these safe spaces that my team is encouraged to just like kind of, be who they need to be and say what they need to say. I feel like I'm largely successful in this, and it has almost nothing to do with me though. It has everything to do with the people that are on my team. They're just genuinely great people they're used to working with each other. They have that comfort with one another. Actually, it's probably more on me to build trust with them. When I came in as their manager, before they were comfortable, maybe if we were doing a blurt, if they were comfortable to blurt, but I think they would do it now. And I'm pretty sure that we probably do it twice a week, in our meetings on Zoom, end up blurting a lot of stuff at people. You don't necessarily, to me, it's like, when you are brave enough, there's a little bravery or courage here, right? So when you have to have some bravery or some courage to be able to participate in those exercises, but it's that next level you're talking about, being able to think first before the blurt happens, right? So that you divert to the direction that you want to go to. That takes a real certain amount of mindfulness, doesn't it? And concentration, but it sounds like it's a muscle that you can train over time.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I tell people is like, I'd love to just be able to do a one-day workshop and be like, boom, now you're creative. It's like, no, I've given you some of the tools. You have to practice and build that muscle and reflex, really. It's like, how do you reflexively respond to these things? And so that's the thing people ask me, like, oh, like, you can't just say the first thing that pops in your mind. It's like, no, you're right, you can't. What I'm training you here is how to tap into your creative self. And then the next step is, that awareness. So you do it in your head, but if you haven't done this before and then try to just start out doing it just in your head, it's really hard because all your thoughts get in your way. So I get people to do it either speaking it out loud or writing, like where I don't know if you're familiar with Julia Cameron and The Artist's Way and Morning Pages. Yeah, it's like that thing where you just don't let the pen stop just to build that habit and muscle. Then it's easier to get there, and then you build in those filters and learn how to stop and redirect. Because I do professional audiences. I've done improv in front of kids. You can't always say the first thing that pops in your head. But that's the second step or third step.
It's dawning on me more and more how closely this is related to mindset and shifting people's, the way that people think about themselves. Like, I often say, and I've heard others say, like the biggest obstacle is yourself. Get out of your own way. You're the one that's stopping yourself from being creative. Certainly from being creative. I think that if you're coming from a place of self-doubt and I'm not creative, I'm not. What do I know about improv? I'm not funny, et cetera, and so on. You can make some great strides for sure, but you are not going to be able to tap into that creativity until you have that leap of faith, even if it's just for a moment where you pull yourself out of your way. You have to shift your mind, whether you recognize that that's what you're doing or not, in order to make that happen. Then, you can then go back and say, either as the trainer or as the leader or as the person who's watching this whole thing happen, you can then go back and say, see, you got out of your way, even if you didn't realize it, you got out of your way. And that's how you were able to tap into this, primal almost kind of thing, whatever it was that was hanging around in your head in answer to whatever the question was, right? It's really connected, I think, to mindset in that way. I think folks don't really appreciate the power of improv in that way.
Well, it's funny you say mindset because in my kind of standard keynote, the first point I say is the first thing to do is to adopt the improviser's mindset. Like I said, in years, I found the key to improving performance on stage or off is not to go out and learn a new skill or tactic or technique, but change the mindset you're bringing into the activity. So I use 3 F's for improv, and that is to have fun, be willing to fail, and to focus on what you can control and let go of the rest. And when you can do those 3 things, the improv gets so much easier. It sort of takes care of itself. You got to learn the rules and whatnot. But if you're going out and having fun, if you're not afraid of failing, and if you're focused primarily on what you can control and not worried about what's my partner going to say, where is this story going to go, how's the audience responding? Like it's very freeing, and So a lot of times I'll do that first and then go into the creativity, because kind of train that mindset before we get into, because then you can remind people like, hey, don't be afraid of messing up.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't do a lot of just straight improv workshops, but often one of the things I like to say is like, before setting people off on an exercise is, look, if you don't mess this up, you're doing it wrong. You're playing it too safe. You're trying too hard. Like, take chances, mess it up. And that's how you learn.
Yeah, the mess is a part of it all, right? On the show here, we've talked a lot about mindset and about Carol Dweck's book, mindset, and the two, fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. I'd want to say like growth mindset asterisk improv mindset, or improv mindset asterisk growth mindset, because there's similarities to how she defines the growth mindset in what you're doing with setting the right mindset for improv, which is this, being willing to embrace failure and learn from failure, right? So it's not like you want to go out there and fail necessarily, but you know that it's a part of what's going to happen. And you're like, fine. It's like, it's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just a thing. And you're like, okay, what can I learn from this? I embrace the failure. I'm going to take it on.
Well, there's also failure with a capital F versus failure with a small f. So even like in an improv context, like capital F failure is, wow, that show was horrible. Like, audience hated us. Nothing worked. But we confuse that with a small f, which is, I say this one line and it killed the momentum of the scene, or the audience didn't laugh. Or, even I've done some things and I can tell like, oh, this is going in a direction that's like the audience is starting to think this is weird. And that's the growth mindset, that's feedback, right? Not failure. So you just, all right, well, let me shift direction. But it's when we look at those little ones, it's this giant, like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that in this one scene and it ruins the whole thing. Like, yeah, messing up a whole show or a whole keynote or something is bad, but like, you only get there when you think of every little mistake as a huge mistake and not just a way to adjust.
Like, what do you do in the middle of a scene, or of whether it's at a show or whether it's while you're doing, an exercise in front of an audience now, when the line fizzles or doesn't go the way that you want it to go?
There's a couple ways of answering that. If a line doesn't go the way you want it to go, and it depends, if it's really bad, acknowledge it, like say it, that didn't work at all, and then move on. Side note, because it relieves that tension, because it's worse for an audience to be hanging there like, oh man, he thinks that's funny. And then you just pivot. And it's not that hard in an improv context to pivot. You just pick a new offer and move in a new direction. And if something's dying, this kind of comes back to the creativity and the self-trust, is when I'm teaching improv, and I didn't invent this, but I really adopted it, using a lot of what I do. You just throw out what I call a magic phrase in improv, which is you just say, oh my God, or I have something to tell you, Dan, or there's a problem. Now you say that before you know what the next sentence is. But what that does is it forces your creativity to fill in the blank. And number one, when you say that in a scene, it immediately gets the audience's attention. It's like, ooh, like, wonder what he has to say. Like, what's the secret? And then it gives the scene a new direction to go in. So like, if we're doing a scene and, I'll do something very non-offensive, but let's just assume it, like, let's say there's a door and this audience is really offended by doors and I didn't know that. And I said, oh, let's go through that door. And all of a sudden there's like this weird ripple. I'm like, oh, I got to move off. And I don't know how. I could just say, oh, wait, Dan, there's a problem. And
what's the problem?
That door, we can't go through that door because the dragon is there. In order to kill the dragon, we got to first, get the sword out of the stone.
Where's that stone?
Now we've moved away from the door. Now, I didn't know when I said there's a problem that's what it was going to be. And that combines that creativity with the self-trust and the adjustment. So you're never looking more than one or two steps ahead in an improv scene.
That's a very useful skill to have. I mean, you said the word pivot. I mean, pivot is such a core skill for anybody who talks for a living, or anybody who has a conversation, as part of what they do. Certainly PR part of my job. I'm always advising leaders, spokespeople about the glory of the pivot. And to be clear, not the spin, right? It's just the pivot. It's moving from one point of conversation that either you're not comfortable with, you're not knowledgeable about, or that has threatens a little bit of a dangerous ground for whatever reason. Or even if you have an agenda, you're just like, no, look, what I really want to talk about is XYZ. And this person who's talking to me wants to go to ABC. I don't want to talk about ABC. I want to talk about XYZ. You have to remember, when you're being interviewed especially, by the media, et cetera, you don't have to answer the questions that they're asking you, right? You can just say, that's a really good question. What I really want to say is, and then just say whatever you want, really say what is what your message is, what you want to say. Or, these little techniques like, it's interesting you said that, or that's an interesting direction. But what I really want to say to you is, something like, you just put a button there and you have permission then to go in almost any direction you want to.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I haven't done it in a while, but I do some stuff on presentation skills and Q&A. And, when someone's asking you a question, the tangential person, right? You're an audience. And this happens a lot with like workshops and stuff. And someone starts asking questions that are completely off topic. And what I tell people is you get derailed because you're very nice. Someone asks you a question and you'll answer it. And then you'll kind of pause and be like, did that answer your question? And they'll say, well, kind of, but, and then they'll pull you further. So I say, answer their question. And this is where we use the yes and idea, is answer their question. But instead of pausing that and saying, did I answer it? Say, here's the answer to your question. And that's why I'm talking about boom, boom, boom. So now you're responding to them. You're not like sidestepping, you're answering, but you're using that as a springboard to talk about what you want to. One definition of creativity is connecting two disconnected things, the ability to connect two unconnected things. And I think when you're talking about pivoting and conversations, that's so important because it's how you're able to move from topic A to topic B seamlessly.
It's also a skill that you learn over time, but it also is impossible to do, I think, without a sort of confidence or a foundation of knowledge. Maybe in improv, and I'll ask you if this is the case, but certainly like when you're in a marketing or a PR situation or a corporate situation or presentation, whatever it is, you can pivot when you are confident that the next thing you're going to say is true. When you know that the next bit of information that you deliver is going to be good and useful information. It's true, it's honest, it makes your point. But if you don't have that, if you're just flustered and you have nothing in you, you're like, shit, I need to pivot. If you don't know what to pivot to and you don't have that basis in either, knowledge, understanding, confidence, something, you can spin, like you can really get stuck out there, and you've seen this happen when people get flustered in interviews and things like this. Like it could be a bad day for someone, right? That almost defines every situation where you have to pivot or change or doing something new where you don't necessarily know what's going to come next, but you have to have something in your mind to go to, right? You have to be able to have the confidence or the skill to take the scene or the game or whatever to the next point.
Well, there's two approaches. One is having an idea where this could go with the willingness to let that go once the feedback changes the direction. The other thing is kind of like the what I just said with the there's a problem, or is to just take the next step, not knowing where it's going, but trust that you'll get there. Trust that you will do something with it. So I do improv in professional settings, in keynotes, where I'll bring up audience volunteers who I have not prepped. I don't know who they are. And, we could be talking an audience of a couple hundred, even up to 1,000. And if that game bombs, like it's ugly. It's going to be a bad scene, right? Because it's like, oh my God. And so over time, what I've developed is that a bit like, hey, no matter what happens when I bring this volunteer up, like I'll make it work. And that kind of comes to that confidence thing. So it's not always the confidence of knowing where you're going, just the confidence that knowing you'll get somewhere and you have the tools to get there.
It's almost a faith issue, isn't it? It's like just the faith that it's going to work out. But I would argue, and it sounds like what you're saying is that it is really a kind of confidence in experience and the ability and the understanding that, hey, it's going to go someplace. Even if this like is the worst kind of person to bring on stage, total dud, doesn't give me anything to work with, or, there's no laughs, whatever. You said earlier even that you can just do a self-deprecating moment and just sort of get back on track, right? But it takes time, and I think it takes a certain level of confidence and understanding of your craft and of your skill to be able to do something like that in whatever your profession is.
Yes, and there are people who develop that level of confidence without the skill and the craft, and they're the ones we all hate to work with because they're like arrogant and they're the ones who just get by because of their confidence, not because they actually have the skill to back it up. But once you've put in the time and developed the creativity and the depth of knowledge, experience, and skill, you go back to mindset and inner dialogue and insecurity. It's amazing how many people already have that experience and skill set who still are just racked with self-doubt, so much so that they don't step into, their greatness and what they deserve and stuff. which I'm sure you probably saw a lot of, like with coaching and stuff. Like that's, a lot. It's not like, oh, you got to go and take this class to get better at this. It's like, look, you just need to like get out of your own way. And
A lot of times that's it. I mean, I myself have grappled with confidence issues over time in different ways, right? I mean, even starting this podcast it's crazy. Like almost every time I get on, I'm just like, there's always a little seed of doubt. And I was listening to Joe Rogan the other day. Say what you will about Joe Rogan, however you feel about him, that dude knows how to podcast. And my God, is he good? Is he a master of his craft? Anybody who says differently thinks he's just getting on a microphone for 3 hours and shooting the shit. There's hard work there. Sometimes I know that he has easy guests, like people who can come on and who can carry the day. A lot of like comedians are like that, people who are always on. Sometimes that is simply not the case. And it is that he's working it. And it's not a struggle. It's just he knows after, whatever it is, 1,700 episodes, which is, I don't know, like 5,000 hours of podcasting, whatever it is. That's a craft. That's a skill.
Well, it's funny. I say when I'm speaking in front of an audience that's like, sometimes the audience is great. They love everything you do. Everything works. And then sometimes you get with the audience where they don't laugh at your stuff and they're very reserved. And in my head on stage, I'm literally saying to myself, like, these are the ones you get paid for. Like, this is where you earn your money. Like,
Let's talk about pivot. I'm not going to pivot, but let's talk about that for a moment, because we've been talking about, how we've been going all over the place with improv and mindset, and talking about, how it works in, I guess, in training environments. Of course, we sort of started there, but you actually have moved into the realm of public speaking. You did that a while ago. So you've been in public speaking for years. You've been doing motivational speaking. You've done TED Talks. You're speaking. You're a CSP, a certified speaking professional, right? Is that what it's called?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
There are people in the world like you, Avish, who make a living doing this, speaking in front of crowds. Now, it took that journey from getting from, delivering training to smaller groups, or understanding that, having that moment where, okay, you know what, I think I can connect improv to business, then taking it even further, saying, no, what I really want to do is speak in front of crowds of hundreds of people, thousands of people. So what's that evolution like? Like moving from, okay, I'm going to be training, to I'm going to be now basically entertaining and training at the same time.
Yeah, so I started the journey was always with the intention of being a speaker, a stage speaker, more so than a training facilitator. Because it's funny, I went to way back in the day, I went to a Tony Robbins seminar. I was really into stuff back in the day. I'm a little lukewarm on since then. But in any case, that's not the here or there. When I went to the seminar, I watched what he was doing, and he was basically performing. When he does his workshops, he's on stage, he's a performer. But he's also teaching at the same time. And those were two things I both really loved. Like, I love performing, obviously, but I love teaching improv. And at this point, I'd been teaching martial arts for a while. And, I saw a lot of, and I know you had done some as well. So, I saw a lot of like the mindset and stuff. I saw a lot of parallels between improv and martial arts as well. So, and I love teaching all that stuff. And so that's when I first got the idea, like, oh, that's something I think down the road I really like to do. So training was kind of the first steps and the build up to it. Now, they are very similar, and a lot of people do both, and I still do both, but there's a different skill set because you need more performance when you're talking keynote speaking, because especially with what I do, I'm hired, 50% of the reason you're hiring me is to entertain and energize your group. In a training, the entertainment is a bonus. They like it. It keeps them engaged, but it's like imparting skills is the key. You have to change kind of the content structure, how much of entertainment versus learning you have. It's less interactive, obviously. Like in a workshop, you can break people into small groups. And but frankly, my training workshops are almost like extended keynotes, because some trainers get in there and they'll send people off for like 30 minutes to like work on this exercise and come back and debrief it for like half an hour. I'm like, man, I would have gotten through that in about 20 minutes. Because I'm just like, everything for me is like, all right, I get really good reviews with my training stuff. But as far as like good instructional design and what people think of, like, I'm like, mine is almost seminar more than training, with a lot of interaction stuff. So I don't know if that answers what you're asking, but
it seems like there's a relationship between having some success in training and then moving on to the big stage. There are quite a few people who have done that and continue to do that, right? Especially when you have something so, dare I say, unique. It is unique, marrying improv with business skills in that way. There are folks out there who do that, who have figured out that improvisation teaches some very useful. You said creativity, but I think it goes well beyond that. It's just, it's thinking, it's freeing the mind. There's a lot of things that you can get out of improv, but really being able to connect that team building and then kind of now taking that up another level to convincing a trade organization, a room full of accountants, or a room full of restaurant operators, or a room full of whatever, these various different organizations. And I just point to the trades because they're the ones that have conferences most often. But it might not be. It could be other groups, right? You're speaking on all different kinds of groups, engaging however many hundreds of people in a keynote. It takes a little staying power.
Yeah, and it's so one of the most useful things I did was I joined the National Speakers Association back when I first started in like 2003. It's a trade association, professional organization, but everyone there really is very sharing. They had content at all the meetings. So I really learned a lot about both the business side, like how do you position yourself and how do you market and how do you reach people, and the craft side, like, all right, how do you create your content in a way that resonates and works on stage and stuff. But yeah, and it's funny, you got to find being unique is good, but you also, everyone says, get out of the box. And I'm like, well, the problem with that is then no one's looking for you. It's like, you got to figure out what box you're in and then kind of find your little unique niche, in that box. So, because when I was trying to sell improv, like no one cared. But when I started branding around how to deal with change and how to be more innovative, like those two things get a lot more interest. And then improv is the tool through which, and my methodology is the tool through which you achieve those things.
And how to deal with change. I mean, that's our life now, right? That's what it's been. Obviously, as a public speaker, in the run up to 2020, you're having a banner year. I know that a lot of people were, but you're having a banner year, right? And then 2020 happens, and just to kind of quote your program, ding happens, right? It's just all of a sudden, ding. What happened?
As I say at my presentation, the biggest dig moment in all of our lifetimes, like the world shut down and the events industry completely shut down. I was very fortunate in that only one event outright canceled and asked if they could get their deposit back. All the others, for the most part, postponed. They said, oh, can we do 21? And now some of those are 22. And then a few switched to virtual. But everything changed at that point. Frankly, for 5 years, I have 2 kids. For 5 years, my wife had been a stay-at-home mom, and she liked doing that. And she used to be a teacher. So when all this started and she saw what was going to happen, she went back to her old school and they were hiring a teacher. So she went back to work and, things shifted. So I became a primary parent, like the stay-at-home parent, while working my business. So while finding time to market and make calls. And I did a number of virtual presentations where I put the kids in the bedroom with the iPad and said, here, watch this movie for an hour while I go, and I'm sitting down here presenting from my computer virtually. Literally, I did a workshop, and on one of the 10-minute breaks, I had the little monitor, and I talked up to my 5-year-old or 6-year-old who was up there with him, and he's like, yeah, Arjun pooped. I'm like, all right. So on their 15-minute break, the people had in this half-day workshop, I went up, changed a diaper, and came back down and continued the workshop. So
that's a big ding.
But it's funny. At first, I didn't do anything that I teach others to do, because I think that's, we all teach what we most need to learn, is the kind of the saying. My first thought was like, all right, how can I kind of keep going? How can I keep doing what I was doing? Which is what I tell people is the first level of thought when you're going through a change is, all right, how can I keep doing what I was doing? That's natural. But the next level of question was, how can I use this to my advantage? How can I make things better? And it took me a while to even ask that question and really start thinking like, well, what am I doing? Is this how I want to be doing things? Do I really want to go back? And I really started realizing that I love speaking. I love being on stage, love the crowd, love helping people in the small way I can. But that was maybe 5% of my job. And 95% was stuff that ranged anywhere from I was okay doing to I hated doing. The admin, the paperwork, the marketing, the prep. And I'm like, is it really worth living where you spend 95% of your time doing stuff you don't like to do just so occasionally you can do what you really like to do? And that got me really brainstorming, using that creativity, trying things out, trying to figure out, well, what is it? And it's weird, like you're a motivational speaker who's like, that's why I don't really call myself a motivational speaker per se. It's like, because I was frankly not super engaged in my life. It was like, get up, research leads, contact. And so kind of try to use to my advantage. And so that's what I started playing around a lot of creative ideas. And I kind of, mutual friend you've mentioned a couple of times, Mike, also college with us, has like been my best friend for like 30 years. And he's done improv with me and stuff. And we started doing some stuff together. We did like this random weekly Facebook Live where we talked about 80s movies for a while. And it was just fun. But from that, then popped this idea in my head about a podcast, which would be a straight improv comedy show, which I hadn't done straight performance in like 10, 20 years. And it was a combination of short form and long form with movies. And we get more into the specifics of that. But it was the most creatively engaged and just engaged I had felt in probably 20 years. I was excited about it. I liked working on it. Doing it was great. So that's kind of a long answer to your question about like, what did you do when this thing happened? It's once I got out of that mindset of just how do I keep doing what I was doing now that things have changed, and instead said, well, now that things have changed, what can I change to make things even better than it was before? That got the mind moving in the new direction, which will hopefully end up, in a very good place.
Well, I mean, I've heard the show, and I'm certainly not a person who's broadcasting to millions of people yet out there. But I can tell you that I hear podcasts all the time, and I've never heard anything like this. And we'll get to that in just a second. But something you said was really kind of just reminded me. So it almost was like you had to go through this grief cycle. I think extra hard for somebody who has a lot of comedy in their life. You had this public speaking activity going, this public speaking career or life or whatever word you want to choose. You were a public speaker. That's how you defined yourself. And I guess in a lot of ways, even if 95% of what you were doing was admin nonsense, maybe you didn't see that time. But point is that once the pandemic hit, and then it's all of a sudden crap, ding, as life does to you, that's now different. There's not a death there, but maybe at the time it sort of felt like, oh crap, it's all dried up. Like we don't know when we're getting back. This is not something I made up, by the way. I attribute this. All this is one of my idols, Mark Schaefer, was talking about this during the pandemic, about how marketers in particular, but people are going through these stages of grief. So marketers really need to understand this. When you talk to people during the pandemic, you're talking to people who've suffered some serious loss, and it's not specifically loss of people, although that was certainly true for 500,000 people for sure, but and their families, but or more than that, actually. Sorry, 700 some thousand people and their families. But I don't want to belittle or underestimate any of that. As a society, we went through a lot. People lost their livelihoods. People had to make changes they weren't prepared to change. Everybody's in a different place in their head. Some haven't caught up to themselves yet. Subconsciously, who knows what's doing to you? When you're talking to people, this Mark advised us, and he was right. When you talk to people, you have to remember, like, you might be speaking to people who are in serious grief and don't realize it, or maybe they do realize it. So instead of being at a party where you're meeting, hey, how you doing? I'm Dan. It's more like being at a funeral where there's a crowd of people, and instead of saying, hey, how you doing? I'm Dan. It's like, you have to approach it from this position of empathy and condolences and just listening, right, to see where people are at. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting, because you coped with that by making a pivot of your own and just doing what so many of us did, which is to kind of say, you know what, I'm at home. I mean, I was fortunate to remain employed the entire time, but like I'm home and I have this time, and I'm just kind of like, life is too short, man. What is it that I really want to do? I discovered the podcast at that time. I thought that I always wanted to do something creative. I wanted to have a creative outlet. The microphone seemed to be the easiest way. Like I didn't have to write. I'm a good writer.
Mm-hmm.
I could be a great writer probably, but I'm a good writer. And I am unfortunately not all that happy with the effort it takes to write. You know what I mean? I'm fundamentally a lazy.
We could spend a whole hour talking just about that.
Right. I'm fundamentally lazy. The podcast, and initially I thought it was like kind of easy way. It turns out the podcast is a lot of work. It is, especially if you want to deliver a good show, and not the show itself, like talking with you now, Avish, and having my guests, that's not work. That's just, it's so fulfilling to me. As I said earlier in the show, like it's about curiosity for me. I learn stuff from people. I learn about people. I reconnect with folks who I haven't seen in ages. It is all upside. But after I turn the mic off and after you go and, everything, then I got to go through the editing, and I got to go through the writing of the show notes and this and that. And when am I going to publish it? Then that's the admin stuff kicks in. And, I dream of the day in the future when I have enough of a following, enough listeners where, I can monetize that a little bit, at least enough to get that part taken care of. But it's okay. It's a labor of love right now. Please don't interpret this as me complaining. That's not what it is. You did that. So during the pandemic, you took a hard look at where you're at. Thankfully, with support of people like Mike, I always make fun of Mike in many ways just because of habit. For 30 years, I've been making fun of Mike. He's been my little brother for ages and ages, and love him to death. Doesn't know how to answer a letter, an email, but hey, that's a whole different story. For our listeners out there, by the way, I will have Mike on the show. I have to have him on the show, and he is such a talented musician. Holy crap, So teaming up with him and having a support network like somebody like Mike probably was such a valuable thing for you during these times that you feed off each other. So you did a little bit of a pivot, and you said, you know what, I kind of want to entertain again, and this audio medium turns out to be a really good one for that. So you go and you decide to do this show. So please tell everybody a little bit more about how the episodes are broken down, because it's a pattern, right? Every episode of your show has a sort of structure.
Yeah, happy to do that. If I could just real quick, just kind of build off of one other thing you said there. You talk about how thought about and, what I wanted, what I really want to do. And I think the big distinction there is that, and this is not to toot my own horn by any stretch, because I'd probably been struggling with this question for a couple of years, even before the pandemic, just in the back of my head. The difference, the pandemic gave me the kick in the butt to try stuff. And I think we're all sitting there, not we're all, but people who struggle with this, they get caught in just thinking and no answer comes to them. So I did this whole thing called solo prov, where I was like getting on Facebook Live and doing improv just totally by myself, seeing how that resonated. Could I build that up? And then I started doing the Facebook Live things with Mikey. And then this idea came, and it was just like by virtue of trying stuff, willingness to fail, getting that feedback, that growth mindset. When I finally got into that mode, I stumbled upon the thing. And I say this all to my keynotes, like too many of us are waiting to have it all figured out before we take the first step. And it's just when you take the first step, like the path appears, right? That's some kind of, I don't know if that's biblical or whatnot, but
open one door, others open to you as well. Like I say that all the time, like you open a window, you open a door and find a new road, and then there's new roads after. Like you have to take that first step.
If you take the step and see what happens and make an adjustment, not only will you make progress better and faster, but you will often end up somewhere far better than your original plan.
Yeah.
Because you're adjusting as you go. But if you sit there, you'll spend like years. I'm not sure if that's going to work. So anyways, so this is where we ended up. And so it's a show called In a World of Improvised Movie Homages. So Mike and I, we love movies. We did the 80s movies podcast. We talk about movies all the time. We also love the craft of storytelling. Like I've read a ton of books on novel writing, screenplay writing. You talk about writing and the work. So my dream since I was like in third grade is to write a novel. I've started like 5, but I just don't have the discipline or the patience to stay at it. I probably love story and plot more than I love writing. Like I can analyze the hell out of a story and talk about it. And obviously we love improv. So I came with this idea for a story that or a show which I'd never heard of before. In improv, there's usually 2 schools of performance, long form and short form. Short form is like games, like Whose Line Is It Anyways? Comedy sports, theater sports. Long form is where you get like a suggestion or maybe no suggestion, and the improvisers just perform for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. And there's some structure there, but it's often just like a long play almost, different scenes, but it's not quick-witted games. And I love the quick thinking games. I think that's where my strength is. That's what's fun for me. But I also love the long form narrative. So I said, why don't we combine the two? So why don't we do a long form, but instead of just telling a story, let's play a bunch of games, but each game will progress the story. Imagine a show like Whose Line Is Anyways, where every game that ends, the next game has to pick up the characters and story elements from the game before it. And then we decide to theme each one around a movie because we love movies and we talk about them. So we've done one that was in the style of a James Bond movie and one that was like a fantasy Dungeons and Dragons and one that was, for Halloween, we did a Halloween slasher and a Gremlins and an Omen. So the show format works is me and Mike get on and we announce the genre and then we spend 5 minutes just talking about what are the tropes in this genre? Like what makes a James Bond movie a James Bond movie? Just for 5 minutes. And then we spend 5 minutes talking about an outline. Like, all right, well, for our movie we're going to do today, let's make a rough high-level outline, like in Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4. Then we spend 5 minutes for each act. We say, what's the improv game we're going to play to tell this part of the story? So it could be the alphabet scene or, Dig or, if you're familiar with improv games, any game you see on Whose Line Is Anyways. And then we just perform it right there. And we go through it. It's a ton of fun. It's there's no audience there, so it's hard to know how much people are enjoying it. You talk about your small following so far, and we're a much newer podcast than you, so we're still building that.
You probably already have more people. I'm just kidding. I'm not. I love all of my listeners. Please keep listening.
Yeah, and I love the people who are listening. The 5 people and my parents who are listening. It's fun, it's creative, and if you like improv comedy, and if you like movies, and if you like just part of the reason we put that discussion on there is our theory is that people who like the creative process and the storytelling process will enjoy hearing how we construct it.
I'll tell you what I really loved about, I listened to the James Bond, Far From Disney. First of all, you guys have encyclopedic knowledge of these movie genres, maybe either from having too much time on your hands or just from continually doing, like the show you were doing about 80s movies, but also just from genuinely being a fan. You can tell that you have a love and a fandom innate for these works, this art. What I loved a lot about it, though, is like that comes through, but when you walk through the process of constructing the movie, right, which ends up being a 20 or 30 minute long form performance, it's only audio, right? So 20 or 30, and I love that too, that it's like you're constructing a movie, but it's only a 20, 30 minute long movie. So like, it's going to move, but you kind of let people in behind the curtain first. And your discussion with Mike, like the way that you guys talk to each other and discover things, it's almost like we're sitting around a table at the diner and I'm listening to you guys talk about this stuff, and it's very relatable and witty and funny. And like, yeah, I mean, the tropes that you guys are coming up with and the scenes that you're setting, totally see it. So it's a really rewarding experience to listen to the whole thing. I'm totally aware that when folks choose to listen to podcasts, they're giving us a gift, right? There's so many things out there. You decide to do one Joe Rogan, that's 3 other podcasts that you're never going to listen to, right? I mean, it's
yeah. My podcast app has like 100 unlisted episodes. I'm like, yeah.
I don't expect everybody to listen to every episode. I mean, except for my show, but I don't expect everybody to listen to. This will be, I think, around episode 70. I mean, if anybody out there has listened to all 70 who's not my mother, I mean, that's some dedication. And whoever you are, let me know. I think that the show that you've got there is like the kind of thing that has a serious potential to catch on. I would love to know how I can sort of help you do that. That's a side conversation, but I want our listeners to know, just go to in a world of improvised movie homages.
Improvised movie homages. Yeah. And it's on all the main, any podcasting platform. And the website is Avish and Mike. That's AVISH and Mike.com. That's like the show website with all the, the episode links and all the links to various podcast apps and stuff. So yeah, we're on all the stuff. Yeah, please give it a listen and let us know what you think. And
it's terrific. I mean, it really is. It's a very unique approach, and I'm very hopeful that it takes off, partly because it's so unique. We were talking before the show that my show, the Dan Nessel Show, is unique because it is me, but for no other reason. I mean, it's, look, it's unique because like nobody else has these exact same types of conversations I have. I bring my own unique perspective. I'm confident in that. I have tremendously great guests. So it's not like there's a special, hey, if you want to know everything about, marketing to the 20 to 30s demographic in mid-sized cities, this is not your podcast, right?
Yeah. Your podcast is very similar to my speaking business, which while I have a unique approach with the improv, I never had an industry niche. And like when you're in the Speakers Association, that's one of the things they tell you is like,
yeah,
pick a tight niche. It just never worked for me for what I wanted to do in my business. And it was kind of like you're saying about your show. It makes for a harder, longer road, because if I just focused on human resource professionals and, built all my networking contacts there and made all my contents very, very targeted HR pros, it'd be easier to build my business, but I wouldn't really care as much about the business I built. Not that I don't love my HR audience. You are literally my favorite audience to speak to. I love the HR conference, is my favorite group to speak to, but it's still like, that's not who I am.
I hear you, right? There's a certain point where you're like, I'm just not going to betray myself. But on the other hand, I mean, there are plenty of people out there who really want to speak to a niche. They really want to. They really want to talk about only the collector's edition of pop rocks from the 1970s and 80s. That's all they want to talk about. And, hey,
I want to talk to that person.
I want to talk about that too. I think that'd be a great topic. Either way, like what you've got going on with In a World of is really interesting. There's a couple of these, there's the rewatchables, which is a fantastic. I don't know if you listen to the rewatchables. Love the rewatchables. If you're a movie fan, it's fantastic. You kind of flipped that a little bit. because you're just taking, instead of actual movies, you're taking the genres that they come from. And actually, it's a good complement to the rewatchables, I think, because, the rewatchables does cover, like they talk about exactly the types of things that you are basically leveraging to make your show.
Yeah, I listen to a few movie podcasts. Some are more about good movies, some are about bad movies, but they all sort of talk about like what's good with the plot or what's wrong with the plot or how that, like, so I love that stuff. Like anything with story, like I just love. And it's funny, like, not, what you're talking about with your niche, but you keep mentioning how you like creativity and curiosity. And I feel like I think just not to give you unsolicited advice, but the whole thing around curiosity, I think it's still generic. It's not like niched, but just like, what Dan is curious about. Because there's like whole shows about like exploring different topics. So your niche, it's almost like not having a niche becomes your niche. It's like,
I think that's kind of where it's evolving. But I just love doing it. So, and I'm gonna keep doing it. So that's all important. But there's one other topic I wanted to cover with you real quick. We're about at time, and it's okay. Like I don't have a particular time limit because hey, it's my show and I make the rules. You and I, and a few folks we know, Mike, my dear friend Ben. There's a few other folks out there, have reconnected in the last several years. Certainly this last year, because of our shared love for a crazy trio from Canada called Rush. Right now, I'm really raising the geek flag high here. I pale in comparison to my interlocutor here. I mean, Avish, you are absolutely the depth of knowledge you have about this band Rush has inspired me to beef up my own listening and knowledge of the band too, because I've always loved Rush. But there's a point here. So, we don't agree necessarily on which Rush songs are the best Rush songs, but we do agree that Rush is a fantastic band, and even the worst Rush songs, either of us, are still great songs. So that's one thing. The thing here that I think is really interesting, because we talk about niche. You started this small discussion group on Facebook during the pandemic, or a little bit before, maybe, but it took off during the pandemic. Just, hey, let's just talk about Rush, and it's the Daily Rush. Like, how much can you talk about one band? Dude, every single day, like, or weekday, right? And even on the weekend, some of the other people, but every single day, Avish here posts a question or a song or something every day. So in addition to, the podcast work you're doing, in addition to other things you're doing, you have done something here that builds a community, right? It's a small community, but it's an organically growing community. And I think there's something there as a lesson to be drawn where you found an affinity, a harmless one, right? We never ever talk about politics in that group. We never talk about like anything controversial. The only controversy we have is why that Rush album sucks and this one's great. And, you and I are in that controversy sometimes, but it's fun. It's a fun.
Yeah, there's always something that someone likes and someone doesn't, but it's always very respectful. No one's ever like, you're an idiot for not liking this.
Apart from Closer to the Heart, but that's a whole new story. Hey, I had to mention it.
I knew it was coming.
But still, it's respectable. The point is, though, that there's this what you've created is a sense of belonging that I think is missing from so many of our lives, so many communities out there. We found one commonality, which is Rush. But talking about it, we find other commonalities. There's a certain love for an appreciation for music of all kinds. There's a certain appreciation for raw talent and hard effort and hard work. Anybody who hears the words Neil Peart should understand that. It's a group of guys, really. I don't think there's any women in the group right now, right? I know there are female Rush fans. It's become a little kind of like I use it as a reward during the day. Like if I've done some work and I feel like, I can take a break, I go tune into my, my Daily Rush. I check it out. And it's become like a religious thing for me almost. I go and I check it out. The sense of belonging that you've created there, Vish, kudos, man. I'm thinking that maybe that's the secret, or maybe that's one of the things we need to look at for making strides for how we I guess, build businesses maybe in the future or whatever, what's the affinity, and look for people to come to you and to share their affinities and, keep it a safe space. I don't know.
Yeah, I like that idea. I think the part of the reason that group worked is there was a commonality we're already into, right? I'm not trying it's not like, hey, here's my speaking page and I'm trying to get people to like me. It's like, no, look, we already like Rush. I invite, and then I just, the group was called this is one of those things that started almost the name came first. Like I thought of an idea for a group called the Daily Rush. I'm like, oh, how does that not exist? Like kind of like that improv idea, right? Like it's such an obvious name. I'm like, oh, and so the first iteration was, Rush's catalog has, I think, 167 songs. So I'm like, each day I'm just gonna post a song and share my thoughts and say, what are your thoughts on this song? And I did a random order. And so it was low commitment, but it was like inviting, saying, here's a song, talk about it. And people shared and people shared and people shared. And then when we got through 167 songs, it just took like whatever, 35 weeks, I was like, well, I want to keep doing this. And so I had to expand a little bit. I kind of made a countdown and I try to simplify it as much for me. So like Mondays, I post an album, say, what's your favorite song on this? Wednesdays, I find some YouTube video and post. And Friday, I do a random thing. So it's maybe it seems like a lot because it's every day, but it's pretty streamlined. Even when I post something, I try to do it from the perspective of like, what do you guys think about this? Or here's something interesting. It's not me pontificating about Rush or trying to teach or trying to be the leader. And that's hard for me, not necessarily in the Rush group, but in general, because I'm a performer, right? Like I want to be in front of an audience. I want the recognition, the approval. But to your point about affinity and community, just, create a place where people who have an affinity for something can connect and chat and seed it. I think that's the other thing. Sometimes people make a group, like here's a Rush group, and then just hope people will post. But it's like just little seedlings along the way. And now like there are people who I see interacting who I have known both of them separately. And I know they don't know each other, but they're building, you can see them kind of building little relationships just through the interactions in the group, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. I've made a couple of friends in the group. I mean, it's a great little group of people who just kind of are weirdly into
the greatest band of all time.
That's the greatest band of all time. Yeah.
Which you may not feel that way, but I think it's
well. I mean, top three. I mean, sometimes number one for me. Like we've talked about this too, but I'm really grateful to that. And so the point is that here we are. It's almost Thanksgiving, and I started this show by saying how grateful I am to you, Avish, and I want to kind of wrap it up by reiterating that, like with not only since through all the laughter you provided over the years, but also being my friend and staying connected and keeping me in mind anytime you've got a new book coming out or you're working on your public speaking. Just keep me in the loop, and it's always been great. And now with the Daily Rush, I'm like basically talking to you every day. This is a lasting friendship. And I'm grateful to you for that. And I'm grateful for another thing, which is you coming on my show. I'm starting to get into deep karma debt here. I don't know what I'm going to do about that.
No debt. No, I'm grateful too. And I thank you for having me on and letting a chance to talk about the business of the podcast. And I've been, I've been listening to your podcast too. Like, and you talk about like your podcast, like others. And I listen to a lot of podcasts and business ones. And what I like about yours is like the guests you have on your shows aren't necessarily the ones making the rounds, So like, I'll go on like 5 other podcasts, and they're like, oh, there's that author. Oh, same author, same author. And yours is like, oh, here's someone I never heard of. Oh, wow, that's like a CEO that started this cool company. Let me go learn from them. And
right, I was saying earlier that I believe in the and I think there's a power in a solid network. If you have a good network of people, it will yield good people. I don't have to ever look real far to get great people to be on my show. If they're recommended, and most people are, by people within my network, and I know that they're going to be a good guest. And I know you're going to be, I mean, I knew about you because I've known you for ages. So there's that. But look, if people want to find you, Avish, they go to avishparashar.com, and your name is going to be spelled properly in the episode title. So
if you also type Avish, Avish, into Google, I'll probably be one of the first 2 results. But yeah, avishparashar.com.
Well, there you go.
It's the site.
It's not exactly John, is it? But Avish.
It is not.
So Avish Parashar, look for In a World of Improvised movie Homages, anywhere you look for podcasts. Anything else, Avish? Any place else where people can find you? LinkedIn, of course, but any place else people can find you?
Yeah, those are the main places. I got books on Amazon, but all that stuff is linked on avishparashar.com, and the website for the podcast was avishandmike.com. So
avishandmike.com, right? Okay.
Yeah. So if anyone's got any questions, anything I said, you want more information about, just, go to the website and send me an email. I'm happy to chat or clarify whatever you need.
Fantastic. Avish, thank you again and again for coming on the show. And I'm really looking forward to seeing your podcast move from success to success.
Thank you very much, Dan. Appreciate it. And, it'd be fun to do this with Mikey someday too.
Absolutely.